All right, welcome everyone to the IETF 110 Administrative and Operations Plenary. I'm Alyssa Cooper and I am the IETF Chair for a few more minutes. Hopefully everyone's having a good meeting and I think we can kick off. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, I know most people have been in meetings already this week, but for those joining by MeetEcho, you're muted when you join, both your audio and video, and we're asking people only to unmute when you are recognized in the queue to speak. If you are speaking in the queue, to turn on your video, and we strongly recommend the use of a headset. If you need more guidance, there's a participant guide available online. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for today. After this welcome, we will have a presentation from our meeting host, Google, and then we'll have brief updates from a variety of people and organizations in the IETF. Robert, do you have a question? I see you in the queue.
No apologies. It was just a side effect of joining.
Okay, welcome. So we'll have updates from myself for the IETF and the ISG, from the IAB, the IRTF, the NOMCOM, the IETF LLC, and the IETF Trust. Next. Then we'll have a short presentation about applying and evolving quick. We will be recognizing our outgoing members of the IETF leadership. And then we'll have our 3 open microphone sessions for the ISG, the IAB, and the IETF LLC. Next, please. So first off, a huge thank you to our meeting host for this meeting, Google. Even though we're not meeting in person, these meetings still require a lot of effort in the background, and the support of sponsors like Google is critical to being able to deliver the meeting experience that we all have. So we are deeply thankful to Google for their continuing support. And I think we have a video to queue up next.
Hello, I'm Vince Cerf. I'm Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist at Google, but some of you might know me as one of the fathers of the Internet. Bob Kahn and I started the design work on the Internet in 1973, and the Internet Engineering Task Force was started in 1986. Those of you who've been participating in IETF, thank you. Those of you who are interested in participating, please do. You can't become a member. All you can do is show up and share your ideas. Why is that important? Well, the Internet's been evolving for the past 40 some odd years, and to first order, the reason it's been evolving is to meet new demands and to incorporate new ideas coming from people like you at the IETF. And so let me encourage you to continue all of that creative work. It's a huge opportunity to keep expanding the functionality and utility of the Internet as it spreads around the world.
Excellent. Well, that was very inspiring to hear from Vint. So thanks again to Google. And I think we can move on. Also wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who has worked to help make this meeting happen and all of our IETF meetings. And that includes the Secretariat, MeetEcho, the NOC team, the LLC, the tools team, and all those who are supporting the hackathon. Again, the meetings couldn't happen if not for the efforts of a large number of people who put in their time to make sure that everything gets off smoothly. And we've had a really smooth experience this time thus far. So big thanks to all of you. Next. So this will be my report, just a few topics. First, we're going to look at participant statistics, look a little bit at the impact of COVID-19 on activity in the IETF, and talk about planning for future meetings. So we go to the next one. So these are our statistics for this meeting, same format as we've been doing for each plenary during the pandemic. We have a good number of registrations here, north of 1,200, and we're pretty steady on the fee waiver numbers as well. A lot of people participating in the hackathon virtually, even though we can't get together in person, so that's been great. And these are, especially for the meeting itself, these are the registration numbers. We'll have more detailed attendance numbers that get posted after the meeting's over once we can identify actual attendance through the whole week. You can see here also the country breakdown. So we have fairly typical split for us, but if we go to the next slide, we can look at this in more detail across the last couple of years. So we thought we were inspired by some folks who were collaborating during the hackathon who work on the Big Bang project, and Nick Doty in particular, who produced the chart that you're looking at here. So big thanks to Nick. So what we're looking at is the regional breakdown, proportional breakdown for attendance at the last set of in-person meetings that we had, 104, 105, 106, and the 3 virtual meetings that we've had, 107, 108, 109, prior to this one. So if you look at the first set of 3, 104, 5, and 6, these show a fairly typical regional variation for us. When we meet in Europe, we have a higher participation from people who are based in Europe, not too surprising. Same thing for North America, same thing for Asia. And the swings there can be pretty significant, something between 10 and 20% swings for each of those regions, depending on where we locate the meetings. As we've switched to virtual, it's much more steady. And caveat here a little bit that IETF 107 was not exactly the same format as 108 or 109. If people recall, it was a much shorter day. We did a much smaller number of sessions, so the data might not be directly comparable. But nevertheless, we thought it was interesting to look at. So if you look here at 107, 108, 109, you can see that the proportions are much more stable, and a little change there in 109, but something more in like a few percentage points of swing for each of the largest regions from which we get participation, nothing like 10 or 20%. So that's, I think, interesting also because we have been rotating the time zone of the virtual meetings, but that doesn't seem to affect the regional distribution of the participants as much as rotating the actual physical meeting location. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that the 104, 105, 106 numbers, these are just the in-person attendees. They don't include the remote participants. That might be interesting to look at as well and see what the differences are. All of this data is actually available via the Data Tracker API, so people who are interested can go take a look at that. Or if you're generally interested in doing some analysis on participation data of different kinds, not just meetings, but also mailing list analysis, go take a look at that Big Bang project. People are doing some really interesting work there. Good collaboration. Next slide, please. So the IESG has also been tracking a little bit the impact of COVID-19 on a few measures of participation. We looked at some of this data in the last meeting, but we've kind of built it out a little bit more, so I thought it would be good to look at again here. So what you're looking at here is the total volume of email messages on IETF lists, and we have a 4-year comparison from 2017 through 2020. 2020 obviously being the dominated by the pandemic year. And so for email traffic, what we see is that The email traffic during the pandemic last year was roughly in line with what it has been in previous years, a little bit higher, but similar to what we've had in past years. Can you go to the next slide, please? If we look at internet draft publications, we see something fairly similar. So a small dip from 2019 to 2020 in terms of the total number of internet draft publications, but not really a huge difference from what we've seen in past years. So that's for total drafts published. And then if we go to the next one, well, if we look at 00 drafts published, here's where we start to see a difference. So from 2019 to 2020, there's about a 16% drop in the total number of 00 drafts published, which might tell us a little bit about new work coming into the IETF and the rate at which people are coming up with new ideas and thinking that it's a good time to publish a 00 draft. I think a lot of people anecdotally who do work in the IETF have had this feeling that it's harder to get new work going without the hallway conversations and the face-to-face interaction. And I think this particular number illustrates that fairly well. There's a few things I'll say about that. One is that there's lots of other ways that you can attempt to measure the impact of COVID on participation, and the IESG is very interested in people's ideas about that. We also had a little bit of discussion about the RFC publication rate and the rate of documents coming into IESG review. Those are more like trailing indicators. This is more like a leading indicator, but it might be interesting to look at trailing ones as well. And we're also really interested in people's thoughts and ideas about how we can try to make up the difference when we can't meet in person. So if people have good ideas for how we can sort of re-stimulate some of this new work activity, or whether you even think that this isn't accurately capturing a trend of it being more difficult to start new work, that would be, we're super interested in people's ideas for that. So please come to the mic at open mic, or you can reach us at our email address iesg@ietf.org. Next slide, please. So planning for future meetings, people may have seen that the decision process for whether IETF 111 will run in person or not began with community consultation last week. It may have been the week before, actually. I'm not sure it was last week when we wrote the slides, or it actually was last week. But feedback is welcome on the Many Couches mailing list. There is like a very structured and detailed process that we've followed in the past few rounds for making the decision about whether to move forward with an in-person meeting or switch it to online, and the proposal is to follow that process again. So those who are interested, please check out the proposed process, and feel free to send your comments about it to that list. Next. There's also a few other ways to provide more detailed feedback on specific aspects of meeting planning. So if anybody's having any kind of issues at all at this meeting, technical issues or otherwise, you can send email to support@ietf.org. That is the one unified ticket queue for all IETF support requests now. So please avail yourself of that if you're having any trouble during the meeting. If you have feature requests for MeetEcho or for other IETF-related tools, you can send those to Tools Discuss, and they will be triaged there. As always, there will be a meeting survey that comes out at the end of this meeting. So if you want your input to be incorporated into future meeting planning, then please fill out the survey when it gets sent around. And then for a bit longer term meeting planning, we still have the Stay Home, Meet Only Online working group, the SHMOO group. It met yesterday, and there's a bunch of different topics within scope for that charter. There's discussion about meeting fees for online meetings, asynchronous meetings, potential future discussion about the overall meeting cadence and length, what to do with the hackathon when we're all remote, considerations for cancellation. There was some previous discussion about the show of hands tool in MeetEcho. So lots of good discussion happening there, and if people are interested, the list for that group is also the Many Couches mailing list. Next slide, please. We also have a bunch of other information covered online. We didn't have any appeals this time, so we don't have anything covered there. But reports from the IAB, the LLC board, the secretariat, and IANA are already or will be available in the data tracker. And we have updates now and again on the IETF blog as well. Next slide, please. All right, ready for Maria.
Yeah, hello everybody from my side. So I only have a very short brief update. I only have 2 slides and we can move directly to the next slide. And one more, actually, this is only like the cover slide. So as always, and as Alyssa just said, we have uploaded a report to the community, which is part of the proceedings. You can find all the boring administrative details in the report there. And we have another meeting tomorrow, which is the IAB Open meeting. We do this for a couple of IETF meetings now. And we take this as an opportunity to have more technical discussions with the community, to tell the community what we're doing with respect to documents, workshops, and programs, and also to get input from the community. That session will happen tomorrow afternoon, so hope to see you all there and have some more discussions there. If you have any questions about the report, just send an email to IAB or to me directly. So next slide is already my last slide, and it's just a couple of quick announcements I want to make. So first of all, the IAB has reselected me as the IAB chair. Thanks very much. I'm very happy that I can serve in this position for another year. This is also mentioned in the report. And we have some more appointments we made between the last meeting and this meeting. One is that we also reappointed already a couple of weeks or actually months ago, Colin Perkins as the IETF chair. We got a lot of good feedback about him, so there was like no other choice. And Warren Kumari is appointed for the ICANN Technical Liaison Group. But I also want to take the opportunity here to really thank everybody else who is serving as an important position and serving the community here. We're currently in the appointment process for the Internet Society Board of Trustees. So we basically, the IAB already selected the 2 positions. It's now for confirmation with the IESG, but it will only be announced later in May because we coordinate this with ISOC. And then one last announcement, we have created a new position which is called the IAB Liaison Coordinator position, and we have created a new mail alias that you can use to post any kind of questions or information about liaisons to us. We are currently in the process of reviewing the liaison management process and the liaison oversight setup. So you will hear more about this in future. This first step, this first new position is really to get everybody, the community, as well as the liaison managers, a clear contact point, because that has been missed in the past. But more information about this will follow in the next couple of weeks. This is an ongoing process, ongoing discussions, and we will also update you a little bit more on this, even so this is more on the administrative side and not so much the technical side, but it's a really important topic for the IAB. So we will also update you with a little bit more details on this tomorrow in the IAB open session. So again, thanks for everybody who has been newly appointed or is currently serving in any positions we appoint, and also thanks a lot for reappointing me as the chair. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Next slide, please. Okay, so my name is Colin Perkins. I'm the IETF Chair, and I'd like to echo Maria's thanks and thank you again for the reappointment. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with the community for the next couple of years in the IETF. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure most of you know, the IETF is a parallel organization to the IETF that works to encourage collaboration between the research community and the standards community. It's organized as a set of research groups, and those of the groups which are highlighted in dark blue on this slide are yet to meet, so look out for them later this week. And we've just had a really interesting session from the Quantum Internet group. So I think there's some really nice research happening here. If you want to know more about how the IETF works, RFC 7418 is a really nice primer for IETF participants to introduce the way that the research groups work. Next slide, please. In addition to the research groups, we also run the Applied Networking Research Prize in cooperation with the Internet Society and with sponsorship from Comcast and NBC Universal. And the Applied Networking Research Prize is awarded to recognize some of the best recent results in applied networking, to recognize interesting new research ideas which are of potential relevance to the standards community, and to recognize and support upcoming people that are likely to have an impact on internet standards and technologies. And in particular, we try to some extent to focus on ideas and people who would not otherwise get much exposure, would not otherwise participate in the IETF and the standards community, and try and bring them into the community and encourage collaboration and discussion. Next slide, please. So we had two of these prize-winning talks earlier in this week. Francis Yan from Microsoft Research, formerly from Stanford University, gave a talk on his work on applying machine learning to video bitrate adaptation. And Audrey Randall from UCSD gave a talk on DNS caching and privacy. And these were two really excellent, really interesting prize-winning talks. So if you missed those talks, the recordings are on the webpage listed and also on the IETF YouTube channel. And I'd encourage you to take a look at those talks. There's some really nice work there. Next slide, please. And the other thing we do in the IETF is we organize the Applied Networking Research Workshop in cooperation with ACM SIGCOMM. And the Applied Networking Research Workshop is a forum to try and bring the research community, the vendors, the operators, and the standards community together to present and discuss emerging results in applied networking research. I'm pleased to announce that the workshop will be going ahead this year, co-located with IETF 111 in July. The program committee chairs are Andra Lutu and Nick Feimster, and the call for papers for this should be out later this week, and the paper submission deadline will be the 21st of April. So if you have any interesting applied networking research, please do consider submitting it to the workshop, and if you don't have any such work, then please do consider attending. And that's all I have, so thank you very much.
All righty, I guess it's my turn now. So next slide, please. And next slide. Thank you, my term is done. I am now going to be, unless something happens and somebody needs a sudden nomination, I'll be looking forward to whoever Andrew manages to rope into becoming the next NomCom chair for 2021. But I just have to say, it really actually was a pretty easy experience, and I just don't know what problem all of y'all have in not just volunteering en masse and reaching out to Andrew. But anyway, it was a good experience. The voting members were wonderful. The liaisons were wonderful. The interviews using Calendly to set them up turned out to be pretty easy. The IETF provided WebEx worked great. The nominees were wonderful and followed instructions. So it was time consuming, but, if anybody's thinking about it, as I know Andrew's looking for people, I will be there to help the next NomCom chair. And so I certainly hope we get a great new NomCom chair. And I really do think it was a great experience. Now, moving right along, I was asked to provide a bit of info on some takeaways. Next slide, please. Right. So, oh, sorry. First, yeah, no, this is the next slide. Just, if you're wondering about what I think the required skills were that got me through this past year of NomCom, this is the list. And, I know that the RFC actually said that somebody needed to have a good sense of process, but trust me, there are so many people, helpful people on the IETF email list who are just perfectly willing to help you out with process, that really doesn't need to be the strong suit. It certainly wasn't mine. Okay, so next slide. These are some of the takeaways. And this was something that actually was probably, for me, the most stressful part of the entire NomCom process was the considerable disconnect between what the IETF community thought it wanted from an LLC board member and what the posted expectations and desired expertise were, and also what the RFC defining the LLC said that was needed. So this is, something that the community may want to think about, because there is the RFC 8711 does say that it should be revisited about 3 years after formation. You'll need to consider giving input. And also I did communicate to the LLC that there was this disconnect. I think it reconnected. Okay, so I was saying that, I do think that the LLC is working on getting better communication. I know I've noticed a lot more from Jay. I've noticed a lot more from Jason. I've noticed people, are being invited to the open part of the LLC board meetings. And so if you feel that there's this disconnect, I strongly encourage people to take advantage of these opportunities that are being presented to all of us in order to take your step in being better connected. Next slide. Just some others. Some people in the community thought it might be useful if they had some more information on what people wanted to accomplish as part of being a candidate for a particular position. So just some things to consider, if anybody wants to create a new RFC or organize, or I don't know what process is not my strong suit, but maybe consider the existence of a public profile with a statement for nominees and maybe their picture right there. Consider a town hall discussion for IETF Chair, which of course won't be happening for this year, where maybe people can get a better sense of the candidates, because while to be widely known within IETF probably means you're only known to about half of the people in IETF, and other people might have opinions on what you'd like to accomplish, but may not have opinions on who you are because they don't know you. Another comment, and this came from some of the people who are not employed by big vendors and are individual contractors and such, and need to get funding for support. There was a sense that maybe if there's anything we can do to shorten the duration of time between putting your name in the hat and getting the decision, that would be helpful. Again, this would be something, process people might need to look at. And then, just another takeaway, and I gave this one at the last session, is, you saw the statistics from Alyssa as to who's participating, and in none of those charts did North America get over 60% from what I saw, and it tended to be trending around 50%, and yet 65% of the nominee pool seemed to be coming from North America. So I think this is something we can improve on, and I'm really intrigued by the work that Keith and Fernando are doing to try to document some of the additional ways to improve diversity, that they're putting a draft in Gen Dispatch and things like that. So I do hope that this is a conversation that continues on how to make leadership look more like participants. Moving right along to the next slide. Okay, nominees did like the flexible interview schedule. I had times pretty much all across the day. There was a 6-hour time slot during a lot of people's middle of the night that we didn't have any, but in general, it seemed to work really well. There was an interesting concept that incumbency nom-com feedback is the only way they can get feedback on how they're doing their job. So, it may be useful if we considered other mechanisms for providing current leadership with feedback. It shouldn't be too hard to do. I think it should probably, feedback should be separated from nom-com. Nom-com really is not the best way for feedback to happen. There was a request to coordinate candidate announcements with press release and public relations. And so maybe, bring in somebody like Greg Wood before the announcement goes out so that he could have things ready from a PR perspective before the announcements that get shipped. And I'll certainly work with the next nom-com chair on that if that's okay with, maybe we need a discussion on the process of whether that's acceptable. And then, one thing I'd like to get help from that would be really good from a tools perspective is we've got to get rid of the 77-column pre-wrapped ASCII for providing questionnaire responses, and it would be really nice if we had a web form. And a major takeaway is, yes, nom-com can be done remotely. I think it can be done 100% remotely, and I also think that it can be done remotely by just a portion of the members and nominees, and so there should not be any expectation or requirement that, going forward even, that nom-com members or nominees have to be present for interviews, for meetings, for any of that. We need to be able to support all of this remotely going forward, even once we get to meet in person again. Okay, I think, let's see, next slide. And I do have some things that I needed to mention that I didn't put on a slide. So I forgot to put a slide together about the community feedback questions. So I'm just going to run through those really quick. There was a question about IESG expectations of proposed standard. So there were unhappy people and there were satisfied people, and there was no consensus on this, to me, and it seemed that the unhappiness was mostly impacted by personal experience with specific drafts rather than general trends, really, because we don't have statistics on general trends. IESG as servants of the community, motherhood and apple pie, absolutely. It was agreed that this was generally how it should be, but there was some pushback that one job of the steering committee is to steer. With that said, there were views from some people that they actually think the various I groups are doing a good job with this. And there are some people who felt they did not. And so I could not say that there was any consensus as to the current state of affairs as to whether people are living up to the expectation of IESG and others as servants of the community. And again, the view seemed impacted by specific personal experiences and how people perceive things, glasses half full or empty or things like that. Engaging with external impacted stakeholders in general, there does seem to be a belief that the IETF cannot exist in a vacuum and needs to engage with open source community with operators, with other SDOs, and with others in order to remain relevant and to avoid having our efforts driven to other organizations. This opinion was not universal. Some perceived IETF to be in a position of strength where it could dictate how things happen in the world, but I would say that the consensus view was one of engagement and humility. Recycling leadership and returning incumbents. This was not a direct question to the community, but it did get discussed post-announcement of the candidates, and it was certainly considered in a lot of the feedback on specific candidates or specific nominees. I would have to say there is strong consensus that people who have a single term under their belt and are doing a good job should be given a second term. There is a learning curve, and so there is not a strong push in any way, shape, or form to simply have new leadership with every cycle. Now, with that said, I did notice a strong trend that once former leaders are out of leadership for multiple years, maybe 4 or 5, certainly more than 5 years, there seems to be a significant number of people who prefer not to put them back in, not as AD. IAB was a little less clear, but even there was a strong, this person's already been there, done that. We'd like to see new people. And that doesn't mean that people who have been leadership in the past shouldn't try, but I can say that there was a fairly strong feedback of that ilk. There is a strong sense that IAB seems to be a place where ADs go to retire. But even there, there's a difference between if you're a recent AD or current AD who's stepping out of an AD position, there's a lot of support for those people. And so there wasn't a push to not do that in the IAB. But, again, the recent people, the feedback that I saw was different from what I saw for feedback of people who had been ADs a while previously. And that simply is what it is. And I can't speak to necessarily why that is, but I did see a lot of that. And so, I hope the next NomCom chair has as good luck as I did. And y'all have fun. It's not my job anymore. Bye.
Hi, I'm Greg Wood, and I'll be presenting for Jay today. Next slide, please. Yep, I'm Greg Wood, Director of Communications and Operations for the IETF Administration LLC. I'm standing in today for Jay, who is the Executive Director of the IETF Executive Director and is unable to be here. It's great to see so many of you here, and it's been great to see people gather in sessions over the last 3 days. Next slide, please. As this meeting has been going on, and in past meetings, as Ellis noted, they depend really on the sponsors and hosts of the meeting. So we're very thankful to Google for hosting IETF 110, and especially that they have continued to recognize that there's value to meeting as the meetings have moved online. So meetings rely crucially on supportive hosts. So thank you very much again to Google for hosting IETF 110. Next slide, please. You may have seen the announcement that we've restructured the IETF sponsorship program, and the aim of that is to align the opportunities and benefits of sponsoring the IETF so that they're more appealing to current and potential sponsors. They're easier to administer, and they provide greater certainty for both the IETF and sponsor organizations. So more details available on the IETF website, and Jay also had a recent blog post that talks about this. So I first want to say thank you to the amazing equipment and services sponsors, Cisco, Juniper, and WebEx. They make super important contributions that make this meeting and other events and the ongoing operations of the IETF possible. So thank you to our equipment and services sponsors. Next slide, please. Thanks to Comcast and ICANN for being among the first sponsors to be recognized under several new categories of the sponsorship program, with the diversity and inclusivity sponsor, Comcast and ICANN, and the running code sponsorships of things like the hackathon. So thank you to ICANN for that. Next slide, please. Beyond sponsors, IETF meetings and work generally just would not be possible without thousands of hours really contributed by dozens of volunteers. And you see these listed here, the individuals listed here. So I want to thank them. The code sprint adjacent to this meeting took place a couple of weeks ago, and the participants there, as usual, helped improve the tools that we all use to work online with each other. The Network Operations Center has been working for weeks to ensure that the services and infrastructure that this meeting depends on and other events like the hackathon have worked smoothly. So a sincere thanks again to the volunteers, and thanks also to their employers and organizations for making it possible for these volunteers to dedicate their time to this work. Thank you. Next slide, please. Beyond volunteers, and there's an extremely hardworking, broader team that are really committed to making IETF meetings work, and that's whether they're in person or online, and really no matter the circumstances. A quick side note, as I just noticed a few days ago that the first message to the Many Couches email list that Alyssa mentioned earlier actually happened about 5 years ago around this time. And the first messages included questions about whether or not it would be possible to hold meetings with people on the order of 1,000 people, everybody from home. Would that even be possible? And what are the issues that we'd run into? So I think that we've encountered a lot of those issues and some others as we've gotten ready for this and made this meeting and previous meetings happen. So this team, along with other members of the IETF community, have found a way to make these meetings work. So thank you to them. Next slide, please. I know many of us are already looking ahead, even if we're in the middle of IETF 110, we're looking ahead to IETF 111, and we're grateful to Juniper Networks for hosting that upcoming meeting. And as noted, on the admin discuss email list, there's a consultation and evaluation about the location and other aspects of that meeting and the process around that. And feedback is requested by April 2nd. So I encourage you to take a look at that and provide your feedback if you have thoughts. Next slide, please. And Juniper, of course, is an IETF global host who, along with Cisco and Comcast, Ericsson and Huawei, NBC Universal and Nokia, they reflect the highest level of commitment among all IETF sponsors. So as global hosts, it's really these sustaining partnerships that ensure the continuity of IETF meetings. So thank you to all of our global hosts. Next slide, please. This is just a quick rundown of the upcoming IETF meeting schedule and plans. If you or your organization are interested in sponsoring an upcoming IETF meeting, I encourage you to contact the sponsorship team at the email address you see there. Next slide, please. And here's a very high-level recap of participation numbers from this meeting. The important point, I think, from the IETF LLC point of view is that you can see that we've exceeded the plans or the expectations for and the budget for participants at this meeting. So we're in good shape there. Next slide, please. And finally, here's a reminder of what Jay and I look like when we are well lit and photographed. And also just a reminder that we are currently in the process of engaging a full-time fundraiser who will be focused largely on the opportunity presented by the IETF endowment. We also just posted a position for the senior software development engineer, and we're actively seeking candidates for that. So feel free to point candidates you think might be good fits in our direction, and there are details posted online, but you can also just drop me an email and we'll get them headed in the right direction. And with that, I want to say thank you, and I look forward to seeing many of you in meeting sessions and on Gather over the coming days, and I'll pass it off to Jason Livinggood. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Greg, appreciate it. My name is Jason Livinggood, and I'll be giving the LLC board update. If you can please go to the next slide. So this is our current list of board members. You'll notice, of course, that Lars is the new person on the board as a result of his new position. So we're welcoming him to the board. He's joined our official lists as of today, and we've been working the past few weeks to onboard him and prepare him for everything related to the board. Next slide. Of course, we very, very, very much wish to thank our outgoing board member, Alyssa Cooper. Of course, she was not only the IETF chair, but she also served on the LLC board for several years since its creation, of course. And I think it's important to go back and look at the entire sort of life cycle of the process for IASA 2, if you will. All right, hopefully I'm back. At the beginning of the IASA 2 process, Alyssa was really part of helping organize the IETF, helping create a working group and try to achieve some consensus in the organization of the IETF about where we needed to go, and then was able to get the LLC formed in cooperation and partnership with ISOC, and then able to serve on the initial interim board, and then of course the first full board. So she's been a part of this effort for many, many years, predating all of us on the board, and we really appreciate her contributions, not just to the board, but to the IETF more broadly. I would also say I'm sure she's very eager to have some extra personal time to devote to other activities, and we are going to be sharing, usually we would do this at the stage, but we will be sharing some gifts with her to help her and her family enjoy some much deserved time off and a little bit of break and more family time. So thank you, Alyssa. Really appreciate your contributions. Next slide, please. All right, so upcoming board meetings. We do have a board meeting later this week on the 11th, which I think is actually tomorrow. So you're welcome to that. You can find the links at the bottom that get you the WebEx information as well as the agenda. I'll also note that at this meeting tomorrow, we are finalizing the agenda for our strategic retreat, which will take place the 24th and 25th of March. That will also be largely open. I think there's only one small section that is not open. So we'll be posting after the board meeting the agenda for that retreat and WebEx links and so on. So you're welcome to join us for that as well. And we've got comment periods, of course, throughout to get feedback. So thank you. Next slide. So some current work, we obviously concluded the community survey. That was one of the recommendations that came out of the NOMCOM, and we implemented that in December, and I think had feedback open on the survey through January to allow people to comment through the holidays, and we circulated results, posted a blog about that. I think the only comment I would have there is it would be great to have more respondents next year when we do it. Number two, we're finishing up a sort of the preparation of the fiscal year financials and completion of an independent audit as we did last year. I already noted the strategic retreat. I will just make a quick note of the items that we so far in our draft agenda are focusing on. One is community engagement. 2 is how to kick off the IASA 2 retrospective. 3 is fundraising. 4 is improving diversity and inclusion. 5 is what does post-COVID return to normal look like for the organization, and what implications would that have administratively, technically, and financially. And then finally, reviewing any additional strategic, administrative, or technical debt that we need to have the organization focus on. So that brings us to item 4 here. As I mentioned, fundraising. We're very close to having that fundraiser onboarded. Jay's working on that diligently. The IASA 2 retrospective, I mentioned that in our retreat. That's where we'll really be digging into that for the first time. This was required. It was put into the RFCs and BCPs when we kicked off the IASA 2 or approved the IASA 2 structure, that we would conduct a retrospective to see if there were any gaps in the IASA 2 structure, if there are any things that we would like to tweak. I think the idea was, instead of doing this once every 10 plus years, to do it on a somewhat more agile basis. Though I think 3 years is still a little bit waterfall, but in any case, come back and see if there are minor course corrections that we want to do organizationally. And of course, if there are, and identifying what those are, going to require a lot of community consultation, and sorting out how we're going to want to work that is something we're going to work on soon. And I mentioned, of course, onboarding our new board member. Next slide, please. So these are the latest financials based on December balances. The only 2 notes here is some of the net income differences, and we'll have more information about this when the financials are shared. This is largely due to when we are recognizing the revenue from the Internet Society. And so we had a certain amount of revenue that was forecast for this year based on prior process. However, based on the new deal with the Internet Society, those funds are actually coming in the first quarter of this fiscal year, and there'll be more funds, of course. So that will explain some of those differences. We'll explain them in the notes when the fiscal year is closed. And then on investments, the only thing I will note here is don't expect returns like that in any other year. We really lucked out in a way. I mean, it was really the result of good planning, but some of it was luck. In essence, when we got our investment funds from the Internet Society, they were all kept in cash until such time as we completed the investment policy. And once we did have the policy that said how we would invest and what our diversification would be, then we had to decide over what time period to invest. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic beginning last year, the stock market in the late first quarter really took a nosedive. And so as a result of that, we felt that represented an unprecedented opportunity to buy into the market. And so working with Goldman Sachs, our investment advisor, we decided to pull in some of our planned investment timing, and we're able to benefit from the uplift in the stock markets globally since that time. So great benefit now, but don't expect returns like that in the future, especially given our conservative investment profile. Next slide, please. So these are all the ways you can get in contact with us. Next slide. And that's it for now. Thank you very much for your time.
Hello there, I'm Glenn Dean, and I'm going to give the presentation update on the IETF Trust activities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the IHF Trust is made up of 5 members. I'm the chair. Kathleen Moriarty is our treasurer. The other trustees are Joel Halpern, John Levine, and Stephen Wenger. Joel was just re-upped for another 3-year term by the NOMCOM, and so we welcome Joel back and continue on his service as a trustee. Next slide, please. So a lot of people don't really hear much about the IETF Trust, and we're probably the most misunderstood part of the IETF. Simply put, the purpose of the IETF Trust and the reason it was created was to manage the IP assets for the IETF with the goal of making them easy to use and available to use, but while protecting the ownership of those assets so that the IETF retains control and is able to do with its assets what it wants to do. With one, we focused on the IETF. One extension was done in 2016 as part of the NTI IANA transition. There's some material from the IANA that also came into the Trust Care, such as IANA.org, the domain registration, and things like that. And so we serve both the IETF and the broader community. So if you ever wonder who owns the domains like IETF.org and all those other kind of stuff, and who takes care of the registrations, well, that's one of the things we do. We also manage the copyrights, logos, photos, things like that. Trademarks, as well as software. So when tools and RFC tools and things like the Yang catalog are published, we worry about the licenses there and make sure that everything's kept in order. One thing we don't do, by the way, is we don't do patents. So we do IP, but not patents. Next slide, please. So the Trust is a fairly quiet group compared to certainly groups like the LLC, the IAB, and the IESG and working groups, because hopefully not a lot of legal stuff needs to be done. But there's a few things we do need to keep up to date. One of them was the IETF Trust website. I don't think it had been updated since the IETF Trust was originally created many, many years ago. So we undertook in 2020 restructuring the website, updating it, refreshing it, so that it no longer looked like something out of the mid-1990s. We brought it up to date with, early 2000s at least styling. One of the big reasons we did this, by the way, was we wanted to create an easier way for the community to engage when they needed to engage with the Trust, which is primarily around licensing. We get requests for licensing RFCs. How do you do that? We get requests for licensing using our logos, stuff like that. This is meant to be a front door and help people understand what that process is, how to engage with it, and how to work with it. The other thing we've done recently, in late 2020, we did a consultation with the IETF community around some clarification of the IANA parameter registry usages. They themselves, as stated, if you look at them, they don't bear a copyright statement. We had to take a look at that and decide what was the appropriate thing. We did a consultation with the community. Feedback. Our goal, of course, is to make these things easy to use with minimal process. And so in keeping with that, we've heard from the community, and now we're working with IANA and ICANN Legal to get the actual implementation, the right way to label that material on the IANA registry, parameter registry site, and make sure that we get the stuff that we want included in the open access, and make sure the things which we don't have the rights to or need to be bracketed off and protected because maybe the IETF doesn't have rights over them to say what the rules should be, are correctly implemented. So we're working with IANA. Expect something to be coming announced hopefully in Q1 or early Q2. I guess we're getting pretty close to Q2 2021 on that. Next slide, please. So we have some other stuff we've been working on. We, of course, daily, or as they come up, will handle license requests for trust assets. That's just part of our normal day-to-day business. One of the things we, however, have been taking a look at is we're looking at to see new situations that are coming up, such as around the GitHub repositories and what the appropriate way to label things and make sure things are protected. In addition, we had requests suddenly coming in for things that are non-traditional things the IETF would grant usage rights to people outside the IETF to, things like wikis and stuff like that. This is above and beyond our traditional RFC content that we already have well-established processes for managing, or things like our trademarks. We, of course, ongoing, we maintain registered trademarks. We do that around the world. They are not things you just do once and you walk away from. You have to maintain them, you have to register them, and make sure that they are kept up to date. And we also well defend them. In case somebody infringes upon them, you have a requirement to defend the mark, or you can lose the right to use it. The other things we're working on, a couple of things right now. We've been re-looking at the early RFC author assignments that were done. If you know some of the history of the IETF, the trust came into existence fairly late in the IETF's long existence. And so the early RFC assignments were handled a little bit differently than the ones that are today. And so we've been reviewing that, and we're going to go back and make sure that everything, all the transfers, all the assignments are in order, and that we have all the paperwork in hand, and that those things are all really well done and documented. Likewise, we're going through and reviewing and updating the list of assets held by the IETF Trust. The IETF Trust is volunteers, and there's been a lot of turnover through the years. And so one of the things we're trying to make sure we've done is that everything and all the institutional knowledge, including the list of every asset we have, is well documented and published on our website. Next slide, please. Finally, if you need to get a hold of us, there's a really spiffy new design website, trustee.ietf.org, or you can email at trustees@ietf.org. Thank you.
Good day. So I'm Magnus Westlund. I'm here to talk about applying and evolving quick for every one of you. So next slide. And I'm the outgoing transport AD. So I had the pleasure to quite recently approve quick version 0.1, 0.0001 and HTTP 3. And this is, it's been almost 5 years since the BOF, and seen lots and lots of GitHub issues, over 2,000. There's been almost 8,500 emails on the working group email list. There've been 23 different meetings of the group, and some 21 interoperability drafts of different points of quick during development, with over 20 different implementations being involved. There's also been quite a lot of Slack discussion between implementers. And the result here is really 6 high-quality documents, which I'm very grateful. And I really want to thank everyone that's been involved in this process. I do note that when you take the GitHub process beyond the working group stage, beyond what the RFC describes, we did run into some process issues, so to say, in IETF last call and ISG review. One, for example, about collecting feedback in IETF last call and the review teams that don't see that request. It's just one example. So there's a few things here for ISG and the IETF large to work on, I think. Next slide. So HTTP 3 usage is already quite extensive in the web. It will continue to grow and it will evolve. I also expect to see much more HTTPS usage with HTTP 3 for other applications than the normal web. And use Quick as a transport protocol, maybe for your protocol. So it's been started somewhere. We have 2 known use in IETF. It's DNS over Quick and Mask. There are some more different cases under consideration. It's not been adopted yet. So it's time for you, I think, to really ask yourself if it's time to start using Quick for you or not. So let's see what you need to think about if you're going to do that. Next slide. So application mappings or upper layer protocol or high layer protocol mappings onto Quick. HTTP 3 is just one such example. You can do it in your own working group. You can do it in other SDOs or your organizations or companies. I would recommend you to read the applicability draft. It's not yet ready for publication, but it will soon. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to consult the Quick working group, its chairs, or potentially the transport ADs. So what's good to know here is that if you trying to do this, realize you're missing something from Quick, and you would need a Quick extensions to solve your issue, that's one case where you really should start discussing with the Quick working group, because if this is a general extension, then maybe it should be done in Quick working group as that general extensions. If it's something very, very specific, it might be fine that you do it in your own group. And another thing, if you start experimenting or working with this, don't hesitate to register a provisional code point by IANA for any of the registration. And do that as soon as you're ready to actually start having that implementation. Quick has a lot of extension space. There's no shortage of code points. Most fields are 32-bit longs, and the registration rules are very open, so to say. So don't hesitate to register. At this stage, we're also doing a quick rechartering. It's out for external review currently. It's continuing in the working group in maintenance evolution of the basic specifications. It's also continuing on the operational documents that have already been started, but some new things like QLog, for example, is being considered and enabled by this new charter. And also general extensions is what the group is chartered for. So I hope now you have some more idea where Quick is and that it's ready. Hopefully it will be published within weeks, the first basic specs. So there's nothing that prevents you from using it from a reference point. And I have the possibility, if someone has any clarification question or anything around this, you can step up to the queue and ask your question before I hand this over. So seems that was clear enough. Thank you. Let's go on.
Yeah, thank you, Magnus. And then it's actually back to me at this point. And we go into the recognition part. If we go on the next slide, we start with the IAB. We have this time 4 outgoing IAB members, and one of them is, of course, Alyssa, who has, as the IETF chair, has also been a member of the IAB. I have to say, I really enjoyed working with her the last year, but also the years before where I was an IHG member and so had like even closer contact with her. I think she has like a very pragmatic approach very often, and there has been some very difficult decisions she had to take in the last couple of years. But she's usually very good in like kind of listening to the discussion, but then also finding the right point of time where the discussion maybe just goes in circles and she can make a pragmatic proposal to move forward. And that's a skill which I admire. Maybe that's my German gens. But I think that was also a skill that was very useful on the IAB and the discussions we had over the last year, where she was always actively contributing, bring in our own views, but also views in her position. So I think she will be missed there, and we'll see if Lars can replace her in that sense. But like, as he's German, I have some hope. But I also want to thank all the other 3 IAB members who are stepping down this time. Stephen has been on the IAB since 2019, but similar to Alyssa, I have been working with him on the IHG before. I'm always fascinated because he seems to read really all the drafts that come up in the IETF. He's always on top of things. He's always on top of things that happen in the IETF, but also outside. So he's been very active in bringing topics and current things that happen in the world to the IAB in order to figure out if the IAB needs to discuss it and needs to have a position. So in order to replace that kind of service he provided, I think we all on the new IAB have to work together and replace him. But you know, Stephen, if you want to push an email to the IAB from time to time, make sure we're aware of the right things. We still happily take that. But also, besides that, Stephen has been very active on the IAB. He has created and chaired the Model T program. He has been active on the last workshop we had last November, and he's usually one of the persons who raises his hand if there's any kind of admin task that need to move forward. So thanks a lot for that. And Mark actually has been kind of equally active, I have to say. Mark has been on the IAB since 2017. He has been very active in the IAB, but I think he's also very active in the IETF as a whole. Really tries to drive things forward, really tries to make the internet better, and also brought, like in that sense, his views into the IAB, and have been very active in the IAB in different positions. He was a member of RSOC. He has been the W3C liaison for a while, and then switched over in the Shepherd role. And he's also one of the persons who's kind of active in every decisions and take up tasks if needed. So thanks for that part, and thanks for engaging very actively. And then Jeff together with Mark and Alyssa and Yari actually has also been on the IAB since 2017. So as like 3 of those 4 people are stepping down, and like Jeff was also one of the persons who was like bringing in kind of this knowledge from like the last 4 years and the experience, and he was always a good person to ask if you need to know about something that has been a long-term activity on the IAB or has been discussed in previous times. So that's definitely something where we will miss him, and I think Jari has to now pick up the remaining responsibilities here and step in for all of them. So again, thank you all 3 of you. You might wonder now why there are these glasses on the slide. And on the one hand, this is a little bit a reminder that like the last year, I think was quite challenging for all of us. But on the IAB, I think it was also challenging, especially for new IAB members, to get to know each other, because we usually have those retreats, or we also meet in person at other meetings where we really get to know each other a little bit better. And the retreats give us enough time to talk about technical stuff, about topics that needs discussion, but it has also a really important role where everybody sits together and just gets to know each other a little better, and we work together as a group and get to know each other. So that was definitely missed out. We try to have some social involvement, but I don't think that could replace it fully. So what we will do here is that all of you will get shipped some nicely IAB branded glasses and the respective liquid that fits into these glasses. So at least you can at home have a little drink, remember your good times on the IAB, and cheer on the IAB time. And then hopefully we all can have together a drink, even so you might not be on the IAB at that point or you will not be on the IAB at that point of time anymore. I think we can hopefully all have a drink together when we're back in person somewhere. So thanks a lot for your participation in the IAB.
Great. So we also wanted to recognize our outgoing IHG members. I'm going to recognize my co-ADs here first. So Barry, Deborah, and Magnus, they share the distinction, I think, if I have my information correct, of each having served 6 years on the IESG, which is a long time, I can tell you from experience. And they were not all consecutive. So Barry and Magnus each served prior terms previously and then came back for a third term. Magnus, going back to 2006, I think was when he started his first term, and Barry in 2012. Deborah served her 6 years consecutively, so a sort of different kind of glutton for punishment there. But just based on the depth of that experience, we will really be losing a lot with these 3 stepping off of the IESG. I think for Barry, this time around, thinking about it, Barry and I were co-ADs previously in the art area, and thinking about the art area in the last couple of years, it's been a little bit quieter than it was maybe in the heyday. But there were a few really significant milestones that Barry helped to shepherd. The CAPORT working group has completed the CAPORT architecture and the CAPORT API. Not the easiest set of documents to get through, so that was pretty significant. And then very recently, Barry also shepherded the process of taking RDAP to Internet Standard. As we all know, there's not that many protocols that have gone to Internet Standard, so that's definitely something to be celebrated. Deborah has been our stalwart traffic engineering guru on the IESG for a long time. In addition to all of that work, she also had, each of these ADs really had their share of document suites that weren't the easiest to get through the process, but they persevered. And so for Deborah, what I remember very clearly was the Lisp documents. She shepherded updates to a suite of Lisp documents in the last year or two, and again, that was a long process with lots of great feedback, in particular from our friends in the security area, that really made the output much better. And she's been overseeing all of the deterministic networking work, the DetNet working group, which has recently gotten a bunch of their documents approved and out the door. Really a major innovation for performance guarantees in single networks. So that's a very exciting set of developments. And then Magnus, he already talked about Quick. I just have to say, like, you know, there's an infinite number of jokes about when Quick was going to be finished or when Quick V1 was going to be finished. You know, we kept saying it's gonna be this year, it's gonna be that year, and it kept getting pushed back. But Magnus did manage an impressive feat, which was to basically land right on time for his own IESG cycle. It's always painful when big document suites kind of get left, get passed on from one AD to another when they are that far along in the process that they are in IESG review or they're entering IESG review, and then you have a new person coming in. So super big kudos to Magnus for pulling that off and actually getting the V1 document suite through the whole IESG process prior to stepping down. There's a lot that goes into it and a lot that's out of your control as an AD. So that's pretty impressive. And then just since, you know, highlighting a more difficult set for everyone, Magnus also oversaw updates to NFS. Again, not the easiest. One of those documents was 560 pages long, and I think probably the longest document that has come through since I've been on the IESG for many years. And you can only imagine if you weren't on the inside of that process, the trickiness of trying to get a BIS document done at 560 pages. So again, very impressive, and I know I will miss working with all of you, and your presence will be missed on the IESG, but I know that everyone will continue to see you in the community and contributing in different ways. And so really thank you for your service. I cannot speak to the censored icons on the slide, so I will turn it over to Lars for that.
Hi, thanks, Alyssa. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so we snuck that on there to surprise you a little bit. So what this is a gift to the outgoing ADs, if you can imagine. And we unfortunately can't show them, not because they're censored, but simply because they aren't ready. So we're getting digital caricatures made that you can use as your avatar, or you can like get them. We're actually going to send you a framed version also. So the participants should look out whether your data tracker picture changes soon. I think they're going to be great. The artist, unfortunately, was a little overwhelmed and couldn't get them done in time. So that's what that is, in case you were wondering. Next slide, please. Right, so last second, I'm the incoming IETF chair, and I want to spend yet some more time to praise Alyssa. So Alyssa became the 9th chair of the IETF in 2017, as most of you probably know. She served for 2 terms. She was also our first female chair, and before that, she served on as an AD on the IESG, and she served on the IAB. And during those 4 years and overlapping with some of her time on those other bodies, she oversaw quite a few sort of really important changes to the organization that had sort of internal and external impact. So Jason already talked about the whole IASA 2.0 process and the establishment of the LLC, and Alyssa had a fundamental role here, both as a member of the IAB and ISG, but also then as chair. And she also sort of helped significantly improve the funding structure, working with ISOC to align the funding stream from ISOC to the IETF and stabilize that, which is sort of setting us up for a hopefully much more comfortable future. On the technical side, there's a lot of technically important work that happened with her at the helm. A lot of the post-Snowden security and privacy milestones that we worked on, so TLS 1.3, the ACME work, DOT and DOH, all happened under her chairwomanship. Magnus talked about sort of major evolutions to the web stack, such as Quick. There was also WebRTC, which is a similarly sized piece of work that was done while she was chair. And the struggle that's still ongoing of how IETF working groups use GitHub started under her chairwomanship and then got sort of formalized into the 2 RFCs that we're now using to blueprint this work a little bit better. Externally, Alyssa was extremely Livinggood. She played a key role in the successful transition of the IANA functions. She chaired the ICG, the IANA Stewardship Transition Coordination Group. She dealt with a lot of geopolitical consequences of the Trump administration. There were travel bans, there were export restrictions that led to consequences for who could meet and who couldn't meet anymore in closed doors. That had a lot of standards bodies very worried for a while. And then finally COVID happened, right at the end of her second term. And so she helped the organization through that entire experience, which surely wasn't easy. And throughout her service in the various IETF leadership roles she's held, and especially I think most recently as chair, what I most admired about Alyssa was the dedication that she showed to the success of the IETF and the success of the overall multi-stakeholder model of the internet governance. And I think this has come through time and time again. And I mentioned she shepherded the organization through some really significant internal and external transitions. And I think that many of us will agree that she's put us on a course, I think, that will have a very positive momentum for years to come. And I will certainly benefit from that, I hope. And what I personally admire most about Alyssa is the clarity with which she communicates, especially when she's in the spotlight and under pressure. And she continuously sought and found consensus, even when very difficult decisions needed to be made. And I think that is, upholding the core values of the organization. And I can only hope to measure up to the example that she's been setting over the last few years. And with that, I want to pass it over to Alyssa in case she wants to say a few words to us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words and the praise. It's truly humbling. I really just wanted to thank all of you, actually. I think the internet is a marvelous invention, and every day it still strikes me how it's changing the course of humanity, basically. And a lot of that comes down to all of you and the work that you've done, the collaborations that you've had here in the IETF, and the creations that you've put out into the world. Like, it's totally breathtaking to try to stand back and take it all in. So I am incredibly gratified to have had a little tiny opportunity to participate in that and try to affect a little bit of change here and there. But mostly I'm just humbled and honored to have been a part of this community and to have been able to play a role in the evolution and the history making of this thing that we call the internet. So thank you to everybody in the whole community for that. And to Lars, I wish you all the best. I have complete confidence in your success. And if you ever need to let off steam, which I'm sure that you won't, because nothing about this job requires the letting off of steam, I think that you know how to reach me. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And normally this would be the point where we all sort of get out of the chairs and give Alyssa a well-deserved round of applause, which unfortunately COVID is robbing her out of that experience. So instead, since we really can't do this in any meaningful way, I'd like to ask all of you, as you're sitting here in the plenary typing away in the chat room, to maybe take a minute or two and sort of send her an email, and thank her for her service in your words, and maybe remember an anecdote that you shared with her, or send her a photo that you have, and tell her yourself how you feel about her leadership in the last few years. Thank you, Alyssa. Before we continue, I sort of want to take a minute or so to introduce myself to you in case you haven't come across me yet as the incoming IETF chair. So my name is Lars Eggert. I work for NetApp. I'm German. I live in Finland. For the conspiracy theorists amongst you, I live in the same small town as Jari Arko. Talk about coincidences. I've been participating in the IETF since the year 2000. The 49th IETF in San Diego was my first one, which was the biggest one also. I was a PhD student at USC ISI at the time and was sent to the IETF for the first time to present something related to IPsec. There was a research result out of ISI, and what I most vividly remember about that entire meeting was that Stephen Kent did not like that presentation at all. I kept attending anyway, eventually became working group chair in transport and then AD of the transport area. And fun fact, you can become an AD even without ever having published an RFC on the IETF stream. So in case you're worried about that, if that's a qualification, it's not. More recently, I chaired the IRTF for a number of years, and following that, I chaired the Quick Working Group. And as I get up to speed in sort of this new role, I'd like to invite the participants sort of to reach out to me, email me, or ask for a Zoom meeting, and let's chat about anything that's on your mind. This is what we would normally do in the hallways or the bar, which we can't do at least this meeting and possibly the next one. I'll also be in Gathertown, so if you see me there before or after the sessions or in the breaks, reach out, say hi, and let's start chatting. And I want to thank you guys for the trust that you've placed in me. Next slide. Which I think we can go to the next one, which is the passing of the dots. So with this funky eyes slide here, the old ADs are off the hook. The new ADs are on the hook. Everything's transitioned over. I know Cindy in the background has been busy operating the data tracker, so all of us have like 20 million emails in their inbox informing us what has happened with various working groups and teams and so on. And as we stare at those dots, we're going to open the microphone lines for the IESG part of the open mic. Next slide, please. So this is the incoming and outgoing IESG they're all still going to be here, at least for the open mic part. We have gotten some questions by email. I'm going to read them in no particular order, and we're going to have some responses, and then you guys are also free to ask questions over the Meet Echo, of course. But let's get started with those two we've gotten by email. Since we didn't clarify whether we're going to have these questions be anonymous or not, I'm not going to mention who sent them in. If the person who sent the questions in would like to identify themselves in the chat or come to the microphone in response, please do so, but don't feel obligated to. So the first question says, are you satisfied, you the IESG, satisfied there's a suitably robust procedure to ensure a clear separation of roles when a working group co-chair is a co-author of an internet draft? Just posting an email with a no hats disclaimer sometimes seems a little weak. For instance, when emails relate to progressing the document, such as call for adoption, consensus decisions, working group last call, and so on, rather than the document's contents. These potential conflict of interest issues sometimes arise at working group sessions too. And I think if I remember correctly, Barry was going to speak to this question. Barry, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, I'm Barry Lieba. And yes, I think we are satisfied in general. The general thing of chairs having technical contributions in their working groups, and we expect that. And for that, I think giving a no hat statement is adequate. When a chair is an author on a document, that's why we have co-chairs, that's why we have responsible ADs, and there's always somebody to take over the management of the document process so that the author, the chair who's an author, does not have to make the decisions on consensus and any further processing of the document. So I think we're pretty good on that. We have in the IESG, we've had a number of situations where an AD is an author on a document and asks a co-AD to handle the processing of that document. So in general, we have a good system for handling this with all the different people with their responsibilities and their backups on that. I think that's all I wanted to say about that.
Thanks, Barry. I hope that answers the question. I'm going to wait a few moments to see if there's a follow-up. Okay, doesn't seem to be the case. Then I'm going to move to the next question that we were emailed, which says, having asked the questions a couple of sessions ago, I just wanted to ask, given increasing antitrust enforcement efforts, including recent litigation, are there any updates on the efforts to enhance the transparency of potential conflict of interest within the IETF standards development or approval process? Rather than asking an open mic, it seemed a question worth asking in advance for possible reaction at the session or elsewhere. Some similar transparency concerns are raised in draft GONT diversity analysis -00. And I think Barry also volunteered to take this one for us.
Yeah, the LLC led this with setting up a conflict of interest policy for LLC board members, and the IAB has since also done a conflict of interest policy, disclosure policy, and the IESG has been working on one for a while and is just about finished with it. You should see something public about that very soon. The disclosure policy specifies the conditions under which we are supposed to disclose conflicts, what sorts of conflicts we're talking about. And I think that will increase transparency on that. For a long time, of course, we've been disclosing who our affiliations are with, and this goes a bit beyond that and expands on that. So expect to see a conflict of interest policy officially from the IESG soon.
Thanks. And I'm again going to wait a few moments to see if there's a follow-up from the participants. All right, the third question we were sent was about what the plan for IETF 111 is. And I think Jason talked about this a little bit by pointing out that there's a consultation going on. But in any case, this is mostly a question for the LLC and for Jay, which is why we're punting it over to that open mic session. And with that, we come to the end of the questions we got by email. So if there's any questions from the audience now, please get in line. And we have Andrew in line already. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hi, good day, probably is the best greeting. I'll also post this question in the chat in case it's hard to follow with audio. Yeah, essentially, we see a lot more groups moving work to GitHub, and they're using it in different ways, and often it strays sort of beyond the original sort of stated use of just using it for sort of purely editorial discussions. And it seems in some places that almost the entirety of the discussion, the meaningful discussion at least, is on GitHub, with just the sort of conclusions being posted back to the list, which I think I would argue does exclude some potential contributors and can have quite a bad impact on diversity in the discussion. And I wondered whether the IESG leadership had any comments on this and whether more guidance is needed on the appropriate use of GitHub. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can speak to that, since the Quick working group is maybe the worst offender here in recent memory, and I'm one of the chairs. So Quick is really a very complex protocol, and the short answer is that I don't think we could have done Quick if we hadn't used GitHub in the way we've been using it. And we tried hard to not exclude anybody. For example, we set up a second mailing list that was basically mirroring all the issue discussion and PR discussion that happened on GitHub. So every comment on the web elicited an email to that IETF mailing list that people could then be subscribed to and follow along if they didn't feel they wanted to join GitHub. And it was also possible to reply by email and have that reflected back into the GitHub discussion. Effectively, I don't think we've seen that being actually very much used. I think I remember off the top of my head like 1 or 2 participants that initially used the email feedback, but then very quickly switched to GitHub. I obviously have no data about people who never reply to the email, but I simply think we could not have done this without a way to track issues that was allowing discussion and allowed us also to refer to the text in the specification as part of the discussion in a way that didn't involve copying and pasting text. So that's, I think some of that is reflected in the RFCs that we have that talk about how working groups should use GitHub. If there's anything else that can be clarified there, I think we should do that, since I don't think the use of GitHub is going to decrease in the IETF. And Magnus already mentioned in his section on Quick that how we're going to extend the GitHub process into the IESG and then the RFC editor phase of the document lifecycle is an open question at the moment. And we have one example where we did this with Quick, but we don't know if that's the best way to do it. I think Barry wants to speak to that too. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking a lot here, but yeah, I want to expand on one thing that Andrew brought up was that if using Git excludes some people, I think over time the IETF has to modernize its tools and move into different tools. And this is an example of a situation like that where we are moving to some hybrid of email and GitHub. And we're just, anybody can get a GitHub account, I think. So I don't think we are actively excluding anybody. We will have a situation where some people are not comfortable with using GitHub. And we've even seen that in the IESG as the quick documents come forward and the discussion between the IESG and the authors started happening in GitHub. And not all of us were comfortable with that. I think the community is going to have to move toward becoming more comfortable with that over time as more and more work moves into GitHub, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Thanks, Barry. Ben, go ahead.
Yes, so I just wanted to also add to that, we do have people using GitHub for issue discussion, but the text ultimately makes its way into the draft. Now we have lots of places that we can discuss drafts. And it's also not the case that GitHub is sort of uniquely privileged in this regard. People can be discussing the content of a draft in the bar or in design teams or in unicast email. And so, yes, it is a way to have discussion that is not on the email list, but we have lots of those as well. And so this is change, but it's not fundamental change. And I think we have enough steps in the process where people can see what is happening and provide comments on it, that it's not a foundational change. So as Barry says, there's going to be some level of evolution and we can't stay fixed in our static ways.
Thanks, Ben. I don't see any other responses from the ISG, so let's move to the next question then. I don't see anybody in the queue at the moment. Andrew, again, go ahead.
Apologies, I thought I'd give somebody else a chance first. But well, let's see if this also prompts a response. But thank you for your answers, by the way. I think there's a discussion that's needed. On a slightly different sort of tack, but I guess also potentially just hitting on diversity in the sense of allowing people to be involved if they wish. There's an awful lot of work going on in interim meetings, particularly sort of since COVID for obvious reasons, and there does seem to be a risk of shutting out sort of either people that are busy or miss the relevant mailing list post of interims happening, or frankly just don't have the bandwidth if some of the working groups are almost having bi-weekly interims, which is quite a significant ask of people, and there is a risk, I think, that will really reduce the diversity of views just to those people whose sole focus is on the IETF, and will exclude those that have other jobs to do. So again, does the sort of leadership have thoughts on maybe how to get more representation into interims, and or how to get the important discussions happening in the main IETF meetings to ensure there's a broader range of participation? Thank you. And again, I'll post that on the list in case that wasn't entirely clear.
Andrew, I think Roman wants to respond to that one. Go ahead, Roman.
So great question. I mean, certainly the cadence of meetings can be challenging to include folks, but I don't think we have a new situation here in COVID. pre-COVID times, I mean, there was the ability to have the cadence in the meetings, the cadence in meetings at any particular time, as long as it followed processes. I think that's really the thing we needed to be very cognizant of during COVID times, as everyone became very comfortable with the various kind of remote meetings, that we kept to the practices of 2 weeks notice, minutes as required, so folks can follow up as required. I will also say, just anecdotally, where I've seen working groups have frequent interim meetings, we actually see higher quality specs, and we're talking more about it, and we're getting documents pushed at a faster pace.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also I want to mention, because that's something we discussed in the IHG, but also a problem in the IB, that of course dynamics are a little bit different when you meet only online, and you have to manage your time. And so I think it actually makes sense for working group chairs and all participants to rethink about how they want to use their meeting time. I think it's actually very good to see that in the interims, discussion is sometimes much more focused on specific issues, while we use the plenary meetings to have like more cross-area participation and so on. So I think we can do more in making sure that on the one hand we can use the meeting time most efficiently and make progress on our work, and while also have sync up times from time to time where we keep other people in the boat and work together. So I think this is something where we can learn from the current situation, and we should reconsider, and we should have also previously all been working on trying to improve how we use our meeting time.
Thanks, Miriam. And John wants to reply too. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I at the risk of being glib, I will parody the question as, you know, can everybody please stop working so hard? It disadvantages people who don't have enough time to work that hard on the working groups work, which I expect is not really the intention, but at least. Interims I've participated in, I want to agree with Miria that they, or at least what I think she said, which is that they tend to have a more focused and interactive agenda, which I think is a good thing, not a bad thing. If we are having interims where we're just reading slides at each other, then that's a negative. But if we're having interims where actual work to move working groups forward is happening, I see that only as a positive. Thanks.
Let's go to the next person in line, which is Philip. Philip, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. I just wanted to follow up that and say, I'm used to other standards organizations where the bi-weekly conference call is the usual way of doing things. So I'm actually fully on board with this more frequent interims thing. I suspect that it's coming up because of COVID. It's changed a way in which people are working. However, there are a couple of things that we should maybe think around that, in that we should rethink the relationship of interims to the plenary meetings. In that, you know, I've not been involved in Quick and HCP3, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because, you know, there's hundreds of other people trying to say stuff, and so I said what I had to say and went away. And, you know, I think that that's one way of interacting, and, you know, you don't need to be 100% engaged in a particular working group. However, maybe what we need to do is to rethink the way that we use plenaries, so that instead of thinking of the plenary and the interim just being the same thing, an interim being more akin to an editor's meeting in which everybody who wants to can participate and you work the issues list, and the plenary meetings being more outreach, explaining yourself to the wider community, explaining where you are, where you're trying to do, and the consequences of the design decisions made, so that the wider group can then say, oh, right, yes, you've decided to do this, but that makes your protocol not work for green futzwizzles. And the other thing I'd say is that we really could do with some sort of tool that would aggregate information on when all these meetings are taking place, so that when I am planning out my calendar, I can look in one place and see, oh, right, there's 6 interim meetings in the next 3 weeks. These are the ones I'm really interested in. I will schedule that time. And I think that we could, if we thought of this as an opportunity to rethink, we can be more productive.
Thank you, Philip. The one thing I want to quickly point out that there is actually, the data tracker has an iCal subscription that people subscribe to that has all the upcoming IETF interim meetings. So you can at least see them in your calendar. I actually use that quite a bit. And somebody probably has already put the URL in the chat. If not, maybe somebody could do that. So that's quite helpful. Thank you. Let's go to the next person in the queue, which is Abdul Salam.
Hello. Hi. Okay. Do you hear me? Hi.
Go ahead. Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Actually, it's a question and expectation also. I'm expecting that from the directors of the areas, let's say we have 5 areas, and the directors to direct the working groups. So I worked with some working groups, or I had attended meetings, and there are some documents or draft while they get to the last call or the working group last call. I'm expecting the director to say, okay, to have, let's say, a meeting with the chairs and direct that document. It may be interacting with other working groups or other areas which is out of the area of the director. At the same time, I'm expecting to be getting a feedback that this have been happened. But if I don't know what's happening between the director and the chair, how can I interact with other areas or working groups? So I'm in one working group. This is my interest, and I'm expecting that there's some kind of interaction or some kind of information getting to me, and also or a window or a channel I can go to which has this kind of drafts or documents which is in the working group last call, and it's interacting with other areas or other working groups. This way I will make sure I interact with these people or this working group participants to make the document more efficient for the IETF, and it will be helpful also for the IESG when we are participating and giving our comments in short time and also in a more efficient way. I was expecting that, but I didn't see that much in IETF. Maybe there is something I didn't know about. But anyway, this is number one. And I will hope in the next plenary meeting or the next meeting that this kind of IESG give us a report, which are the documents that went through some kind of process which went to make it more efficient and more helpful for our areas, because usually internet is a technology that needs some kind of integration. Usually now technologies are more integrated, so we have to focus on the integration. I remember that there was one participant, I think Jerry, yeah, he was interested in the cross working group thing, you know. So I think it was proposed before, and I don't know where this anyway, this is my my question. You can say it's a question or expecting, you know, and I hope I get comments on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I think Eric wants to answer you.
Indeed, that's an interesting question, of course, and we should address this cross working group or cross areas connection and reviews as early as possible. And I must say, back to my not so comfortable thing with it, that's not always happen. As the inter area, we see arriving document, for instance, about DNS or about IPv6 that are lacking a lot of things, but we see it only in the IETF last call. So basically, the earlier this cross-area, cross-working group is addressed, the better. We do agree. Now, there is no real process on this. It relies on the working group chairs. And for the working group chairs in the participation here, I remind that you can ask for an early review in all the directorates, right? For them, the young doctors, the IoT directorates or whatever, because you know the content of the draft. And so you can address it to the different directorates, and that will be helping a lot. On the other hand, right, so in the ISG, we also have informal telechat or formal telechat, where we can say, hey, this document is kind of linked to, let's say, Quick, or to IPv6, or to DNS, or to whatever. And then suggest to make another review, a working group last call, or a specific last call review by specific working groups. And again, as I'm interacting in IPv6, quite often 6-man is involved in this. So yes, it relies on the human beings, so it's imperfect, but it's really close to our heart as the ISG for sure. Hope it helps.
Thanks, Eric. Next person in the queue is Elliot. Elliot, go ahead.
The wrong button there, Lars. First, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I want to come back to the discussion that Andrew started about the use of interims. So I'm chairing the RFC Editor Future Program group, which is an IAB program activity, but we're running it as a working group. This is a highly contentious topic, as people know, but we've made, I think, great strides in the group. All the members should be really proud in terms of just how far the group has come in this regard. I don't think we could have done that without interims. It took a long time for us to level set our views. It took a long time, I think, for people to find ways to find common ground. And having that, quote, FaceTime, if you will, has really helped us. We did have to come to consensus, I think, on how often to meet. I wanted to push for 2 weeks. People thought that was a little too much for this topic, and they needed time to digest and to consider. And of course, there are other things going on in the world, especially this past year. The two aspects, rather, that I'd like to bring forth, though, is that I think the group was hampered a little bit by the fact that we couldn't meet in person. In that sometimes when you have contentious issues, it helps to break up with a beer in between, if you will, or a coffee, if you'd rather. The other point I was going to make is that the interim activities, I think, have actually opened up the group to people who might not have otherwise participated simply because they couldn't travel to the meetings that we might have otherwise had, and we might have considered having an interim had we the opportunity. So this, of course, directly relates to the discussion that's going on to Gen Dispatch in terms of how is it that we're inclusive. And I don't claim that there is a single recipe here, but maybe other groups work differently. They don't need those interims quite as much because you can just do work in email because it's, there's a nice synergy. Everybody's pushing in the same direction. But if you do have contention, it really does help to have people talk it out. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the input, Elliot. Next in the queue is Jim. Jim, go ahead.
Okay, hi. Thanks. I'd like to go back to the topic of GitHub for a minute. So there's RFC 8874 and 8875, which are great and tell working groups how to use GitHub, and thanks to the Secretariat for reminding the chairs of that recently. But there's also a GitHub organization that's just called IETF, and there's several repositories there. And I have a couple concerns there. One is that it's not clear what the status of those documents are. Just the fact that the repository, that the organization is called IETF, kind of makes it seem like they might have some official status, more so than others. And that needs to be made clear, at least in the individual repositories. I also don't see that the note well is consistently displayed and so forth there. And so I'd like to kind of ask that we get some clarification on how that's used, what it's used for, and that we have all of those usual processes in place to make sure that contributions are appropriate and that the status of documents there, generally not representing IETF consensus, is clear. Thanks.
So I think one part of your question was specifically about the github.com/IETF organization. We're actually recently sort of started in the background a little activity to bring that use under a little bit more rigor in terms of making sure that repositories satisfy a certain, rough set of criteria, like they're of broad organizational applicability, and that they have descriptions and they have websites and the note well is displayed and so on. So this is sort of an ongoing process that I started, and it takes a little bit of time because some of those repositories need to migrate outside of the organization, but some of them belong to documents and to working groups that where that would be a little bit disruptive. So this is ongoing. The second part of your question, I think, is a little bit more about the broader use of GitHub, and I think we talked about this already. That we have the two RFCs you mentioned that give us some guidance on what we should be doing, but I don't think they're the end state. I think they're sort of a good start that give us some rules that have proven to work well. But I think we will need additional guidance on how we're going to use GitHub even better in the future. Torres is next, and I'm going to cut the mic line after him since we have some other open mics to get to. Torres, go ahead.
Yeah, and not sure if this is the right open mic, but let me quickly propose something, to the organization, and maybe the ISG would be the best one to drive it in terms of, looking back and celebrating the organization by, around IETF 112. Think about, setting up a one-day workshop to bring in, the people we may not have anymore in 10 years to basically give presentations, maybe 20 minutes each about, the core technologies and things that happened, in the organization and at that time. And if it's not clear what the opportunity is, then look at the publishing date of RFC 791, which to me, for the IETF would be the best opportunity to celebrate something. And as I said, right, it's 40 years, and in 10 years more, well, we won't have a lot of the people who started it.
That's a good suggestion, and I agree that it's unclear whether it's an ISG activity. There's probably also an IAB angle to it,
right.
But we'll take that up. Keep in mind that IETF 112 might also be the first one we've had in a while that is going to be hopefully a physical meeting again. So there might be already some additional complexities with organizing that. So we will see what we can do. I think I want to sort of take the action item, and we're going to maybe start an email thread about what people would volunteer to help organize, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I think that maybe if it's before IETF and would be virtual, I think there would be a lot of people worldwide to, join in on a video, live stream of that, right? So it's certainly something that's for a much broader community of interest than the ones who made it happen, like the IETF itself.
That's a fair point. And we should discuss, maybe if you care to start an email, for example, to the IETF mailing list, we can discuss it there, what format it takes. It's not quite clear whether it, for example, would need to be, in the IETF week, or whether we actually do a separate event at some other time and have a smaller, like IETF focused event during the meeting week, or what we do.
Yeah, it's just September, right? So it would be a nice match.
Right. Thank you. And with that, I think the ISG open mic is at its end. Let's move on to the next one.
Yes, once more, hello. So we didn't get any pre-questions to the open mic. To be honest, I also didn't ask explicitly for it, but like as always, you can always send emails to iab@iab.org or to me personally if you want to know something. But now we're here for the open mic, so please join the queue and ask questions. We have Andrew.
Apologies, I was desperately hoping that somebody else might go first, but then I didn't want you to decide there weren't any and move on and miss the opportunity. So I've got a question related to when sort of new standards are proposed. I wonder whether now's the time to start assessing them for their sort of potential to really exacerbate the current trend towards centralization, rather like there's already sort of external input on the security aspects. Which doesn't mean to say that a proposal shouldn't go forward if there are sort of consequences on centralization, but at least the trade-offs would have been considered and documented. Because in my view, the current drift towards centralization is highly unlikely to be in the long-term interests of end users. So contrary to RFC 8890, and therefore I think it really shouldn't be made worse as more new standards are brought on. And I wondered whether the IAB leadership had any views on this and whether you think action is indeed needed, and now's a good time to start. Thank you.
I'm just waiting a second to see Yari's joining the queue. So Yari, you can just unmute and talk.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. And I think there's going to be differing opinions on this in the IAB and as well as in the IETF. I personally do believe that it's a big issue and we should be concerned about that. And I think some of the discussions we've been having in some working groups are actually about that to some extent. Of course, that's not the only issue in front of us. I should also mention that the IAB has promised to write or return to the topic of consolidation and centralization and write the document. Maybe people have requested that. The token is on me and I have failed to deliver so far, but it's still on the task list. So that is something that we are looking at.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to ask because I wasn't sure, Andrew, what you were proposing or having in mind or whatever, but we definitely talk about this from an architectural point of view. And we try to, as always, we try to understand what the issues are, provide guidance to the community, and hopefully see an update of Yari's draft there very soon and keep the discussion going. But then I'm not sure if you ask for actually kind of process changes. I think if that should actually impact process, that's definitely also a question for the IHG and see how this is taken up. And we have West there as well.
Thanks. And yep, here we go. Thanks. Good question. That's certainly a topic that has been very hot on my mind. In fact, on my whiteboard behind me, I have a list of different ways that the internet is centralized because I've been thinking about it for a while. The one thing that I've learned a lot in the last couple of years thinking about it, though, is that it's very much a trade-off. It's not just that centralization is all bad. I personally don't use many centralized services because I think it's bad for me, but the other thing you have to recognize is it's actually enabled a lot of very strong usages of the internet that wouldn't exist today without it. Centralized file sharing services and centralized, easy to create web management, web pages and things like that end up in very, very centralized services, which has greatly benefited users, as well as in a recent academic paper I co-authored. we actually measured ways where security was suddenly fixed for a large quantity of users because the centralized service, fixed some pretty severe security bugs, and it actually, or deployed DNSSEC, or deployed HTTPS everywhere on all of their sites all at once. So it's a big trade-off issue, and centralization is a huge risk to privacy, though. So you have to balance all of those. So the thinking is long and arduous. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Hello.
We hear you.
Yeah, I'm concerned about centralization as well. I do get concerned that if we have a bar for centralization or some other measure like that, effectively we would never have standardized the web, because the web can be seen as just a big engine for centralization, to be honest, because of the dynamics of how it works. I'm interested in more concrete kind of measures, especially Brian Tremel and I have a draft that we've been letting languish for too long about choke points in the internet architecture and how we can prevent their formation. And I think that's a concrete thing we as a community can look at is where does this centralize power so much that it gives someone inordinate power over people's experience of the internet. But having said that, I think we also need to recognize that technical limits on centralization are often not going to be effective, and competition law ones may be, and we should be looking to work with the folks who are looking into that now, and giving them good technical advice where we can.
Maybe, I think, Tommy, you want to probably reply here as well, so maybe I take Tommy first.
Yeah, so just on this topic, I'd also like to chime in that I think the centralization concerns that people bring up oftentimes are kind of pointing at certain protocols that in and of themselves are not fundamentally related to being centralized or not. I think, Andrew, I know we've had these discussions around the use of DNS and encrypted DNS and DOE, and I think those are often pointed at. Fundamentally, these pieces of technology are not necessarily centralized, but it's the kind of the market and the deployment models. I think as far as what is it appropriate for the IAB to do or the ISG to do, I don't think we're going to be able to say, thou shalt not have centralization. And probably what is more useful is to point out the areas where we can provide mechanisms and technical solutions to help decentralize things, to help make it viable to have a non-centralized model. And let's not focus on demonizing any technologies that happen to work well with centralized models and decentralized models. Let's focus on what are the missing pieces that make it hard to create generic decentralized solutions. So it's more of a call to action than a call to stop working on things.
Very good point. So with that, I think we move on to Philip.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to address this and kind of recast it a little bit, in that if you obsess about, don't just look at centralization, look about the driver for centralization, which is that the user doesn't have autonomy. I cannot change my email provider, because if I do, my email account address will change and the stuff will be going to a different place. So of course, I own my own domain name because that's the only way that I can own my account. But that costs me $10 a year, which is a significant fraction of many people's annual incomes. And maintaining a domain name is a significant technical barrier for many people. A lot of the times when I see people trying to design systems that are decentralized, they obsess about the decentralization piece and eliminating any possibility of centralization, imposing enormous cost on that design. And the extreme there, of course, is blockchain, currently consuming as much electricity as the entire nation of Argentina. And so what I'd urge people to look at is, how do we give the user the ability to own their own account so that they can have a lifelong email address that they can take to one provider to another, that follows them around so that they can switch without incurring a penalty. And if you provide that capability, I can also switch my social media account around so that instead of being forced into the same network that everybody else is, I can go somewhere else. So I'll be making a proposal in that area in the near future. It's not decentralized, but what I'm trying to do is to shrink the border of the centralized piece to the absolute bare minimum, and then create a infrastructure around that that makes that public goods in the way that we tried to do with ICANN and completely failed.
Thanks. Looking forward with that proposal, but that might be actually more interesting for the IETF as a whole and for the IAB. But we also have the IAB open meeting tomorrow where we can have more of these technical discussions if needed. And then Dominique.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can pick this up a bit more tomorrow in detail. I just wanted to say that this is definitely, it sounds like a call to action, and it's not about demonizing like one technology or the other, but it's about listing the problem space, right? And all the different issues that are coming up, which I've started to do with both Mark and Elliot, and I have a draft on consolidation that I can point everyone to. But yeah, let's definitely continue to talk about it because I think that there's quite a lot of interest. So I look forward to tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you. And Yari.
Yeah,
and
a lot of
like
wise
just
things.
on the side, Philip and Dominic, if you can put your hand down and leave the queue, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of wise things said by many people. I want to pick up on something that Tommy actually said. I think that was the essential piece, that it's not that we need to sort of ban some things, but find the missing pieces and work on that. I think that's exactly right, and this is not about like extremes. Like a lot of people bring these examples, but we can't have the web, or we can't have or we shouldn't have the Bitcoin architecture, or kind of like extreme ends of the spectrum. But it really is about sort of choice, that you have like the situations where something works well. If you configure one IP address somewhere, or one name somewhere, but it doesn't have like discovery mechanisms. And Tommy, for instance, has worked on some discovery mechanisms for some protocol cases. So I think those are the kinds of things that actually help us. And Dominique was of course also right that documenting the issues is a key, and understanding. It's like some of this pervasive surveillance discussion, that we document the issues and then we try and evaluate the situation when we produce documents. And then we have some understanding. It's not that we can totally prevent some outcomes, but we can at least be a little bit more aware. So I think that's the key.
Jian-Kan? We can, maybe now we can hear you. Yes,
hello?
we can. Yeah.
Yeah. So for about centralization, I think the internet is still distributed architecture and decentralized. The internet architecture is still decentralized. What about centralization? I think is service. Internet service is centralized. Internet application is centralized. For example, we use Facebook for social internet social service, and for Gmail for our email service. So because we a very service internet application server, service providers provide very good service. So we a lot of users are attracted to join the this internet service service provider or application service providers. So I think in the future, when our IETF provide more good applications protocols or some so there will be more service internet service providers. So I maybe internet service will be decentralized. So my point is internet is still decentralized, but internet service is centralized. That's my point.
Thank you. And we have Mark on the queue.
This is in response to Yari a little bit, and I'm really glad to hear that he's going to pick up the pen and do some writing. But one of the observations I have in listening to this conversation is that there are a lot of voices in the room. And as Yari noted, sometimes some conflicting voices. And I think instead of trying to find a middle ground, I think it's time to let those voices speak. And so perhaps, and this is a suggestion to the IAB, perhaps this is a natural opportunity for a workshop on the topic so that the IAB can hear in a workshop setting from a variety of voices on this topic. And perhaps to do that before committing the IAB to documenting a particular architectural stance. I do think that the pervasive surveillance example is a good one, right? Because it actually jumped the chasm between the IAB and the IESG and resulted in real protocol design and criteria for protocol design. And I think that that's what's needed here, is some architectural direction that jumps that chasm again, that leads to criteria for good protocol design. That's what engineers want in this space. Thanks.
Yeah, I really want just to add, and I think that was already clear that this is like a topic that the IB actually does discuss for a while already. And we also discussed, I believe, the opportunity to have a workshop, but it's also a very broad topic with a lot of different thoughts, as you can see right now. And for a workshop, you have to narrow it down to make it productive, but I can guarantee that we will keep discussing that and see what we can do beyond just trying to work on the document that we already have there. So at this point, I don't see anybody in the queue anymore. I cannot read up the whole chat now and see if there's anything I need to reply to. But I think last you're just here to tell me that we're done with the IB open mic, or do you want to add something?
No, I would suggest we go to the LLC board open mic.
Definitely, yes. So thank everybody for your input and your questions.
Thank you, and we can now begin the LLC open mic session. One quick note, I forgot to mention during our slide presentation, there are LLC office hours this week. They're on the agenda, and it looks like they are occurring on Thursday and Friday of this week. I'll give it a moment. I don't see anyone in the queue just yet.
So there was one question the ISG punted over to the LLC board, and that was on what the plan is for IETF 111. You said that earlier, Jason, but maybe repeat it now and we'll see if that clarifies it.
Right. Well, I will say a few things. One, the sort of what is return to normal, if you will, is one of the topics for the strategic offsite. And of course, SHMU is working on that as well. And I think there'll have to be a lot of consultations. Of course, For the next meeting, the process has kicked off. We agreed on a process for assessing whether a meeting can proceed or not, really right after the beginning of the pandemic. So we're using the standard process for that. I think the operative question is whether, that return to normal, if you will, whether it's 111, 112 or whatever, is a blended sort of thing where it's a mix of online and in person. And I think, we would all conclude the answer to that seems very likely yes. But exactly, what that will look like and when we can return to normal really mostly depends at this point on vaccination. Okay, any other questions? All right, hearing none, I think we're finished with this section. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I'm not mistaken, this was the last section on the agenda. So if I tell Alexa next slide, there shouldn't be any, correct? Looks like it. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your night, and see you around the IETF for the next few days. Bye.
Bye.